Welcome to this second module of the Climate Forecast Projects training course. My name is Olena Zinchuk, for those of you who haven't met me yet. I'll be your host for today, and I work for the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission, that is a partner responsible for transfer activities in Climate Forecast Project. And we are happy to organize this climate budget training course for both of our partner cities, associated organizations, and all of the interested cities that have chosen to participate. Today we have second module already. I will run with you through a few practical issues and also the agenda of today before we start with our content presentations. So first of all, you probably noticed when you were joining that this event is being recorded. We will publish the recordings of the presentations from today. So they're available also later as a part of the training course. We do ask you if you can add your organization in the name when you see the list of participants. Some of us have the names of the organizations, some not. You can edit it to make it visible, and it will help us greatly to see who is who's from where, and it will enable a bit more smooth interaction. We also, together with me, there's my colleague Maria Andreeva, who's a host as well. So we will be checking the chats for any technical issues and things like that. Hopefully we will be blessed of not having any. And yeah, today we'll focus on the content which is relating to the first steps of the climate budgeting course, obtaining mandate and setting cooperation. We will have some presentations in the beginning, more from the theory point of view. We will try to host good moderated discussions in the breakout rooms where we can discuss with your fellow cities in a smaller groups on how exactly you're doing it or you're attempting to do climate budgeting in this setting. So in order to facilitate a little bit of exchange. And then afterwards, we will still hear a few cities presentations supported by some technical, like practical examples, how this could be done. In the end, I will tease you a bit with what is coming in the next modules of the course so that you are hopefully willing to join us again and deepen your knowledge on the subject. So this is basically the layout of today. We have pretty tight agenda, so I'll just have to go ahead and give a floor first to my partner, Donald from Hafen City University in Hamburg, who will present you a little bit of the project Climate Forecast so that you can connect better what is this training course part of. So Donald, here you go.
Great, thank you, Lena. I hope you can hear me, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today and to feel once again such a strong interest in this second session of our Climate Forecast training course. And welcome also from my side to this webinar or module 2, focusing on the obtaining mandate and setting cooperation for climate budgeting. As Olena mentioned, my name is Donald Dalimi. I'm a researcher at the Hafen City University in Hamburg and the coordinator of the Climate Forecast project. And we, as the Climate Forecast team, are really happy about today's session. And as the whole course, this session is also designed to take us a bit further behind the scenes of how cities approach climate action and climate budgeting, and also to share some of the work we are doing in the Climate Forecast project. So I'm very happy to welcome you today also on behalf of our Climate Forecast partners who are joining us in this webinar room. But before we jump into the most exciting part of this session today, I'd like to give a short, brief introduction to the project behind today's session, so the Climate Forecast project, and give hopefully some context for what you'll see and hear later on. So some of you may already be familiar, of course, with the project, but we also want to make sure that everyone is on board or feels fully onboarded. So what is Climate-4-CAST about? The project is Climate-4-CAST is a 3-year project co-funded by the Interreg Baltic Sea Region program. Its core product is an open source climate action decision support tool, or in short, the CADS tool, which helps local authorities to link climate targets, budgets, and actions in one single framework. Next, please. We are a consortium of 10 partners across the Baltic Sea region, 6 cities, Tampere, Aarhus, Riga, Östersund, Bytom, and Norderstedt, together with our tech partner Kausal from Finland, the Union of the Baltic Cities with its Sustainable Cities Commission, and then we have 2 universities, Uppsala University and the Hafen City University, Hamburg. Next, please. We are also supported by 14 associated cities and local authorities in the project that are following and supporting our work. And many of them are here today with us, which we are, of course, really happy about. Next, please. So the challenge we are addressing in this project is the difficulty that local authorities often face when turning climate actions or climate commitments into real actions on the path towards climate neutrality. Municipalities deal with a lot of things like limited budgets, capacity constraints, and silo decision making, among other challenges. And in this context, climate budgeting can offer arguably a structured way to tackle these issues and make emissions reductions more measurable and manageable at the same time, but still many cities struggle to implement these governance instruments of the climate budgeting in practice. And that's where Climate-4-CAST comes in. The project develops the CADS tool, an open source platform that supports both climate budgeting and municipal emissions monitoring within one single framework. Next, please. And without spoiling too much of our dedicated tool session or module, which is coming later this year as part of this training course, I'll briefly explain now how the CADS tool works or the key logic behind it. So the tool translates and visualizes emission data from climate actions together with related impacts such as cost efficiency into clear and easy to understand formats for decision makers, but not only, of course. So this allows cities to compare different action scenarios and better align spending with their climate targets. And so far in the project, we have been applying the CADS tool to real life measures into our 6 pilot cities. And early results show how this tool actually helps integrate emissions into administrative and governance processes of the cities to prioritize cost-effective measures and engage stakeholders as well, and offering this way a model that can then be replicated hopefully in other cities. And on the replicability aspect, the final and the open source version of the tool that you can see here on the right hand of the slide, together with the operationalizations guidelines, will be published from April this year. And this means that other cities and organizations will then be able to explore the tool and ideally also use it in their own climate budgeting and governance processes. Next, please. And lastly, where do we stand right now? The project started in 2023 and it runs until October 2026. And we have recently finalized the piloting of the tool in the 6 cities. And while we are now finalizing the tool itself and the operationalization guidelines, we've also fully moved into the phase where we share results more widely with a broader group of stakeholders. So one example of this sharing results with a broader group of stakeholders is exactly this online training course for public sector professionals, which, as you'll hear also a little bit more later today, continues throughout 2026 with additional modules. And finally, the course will continue will conclude with a climate budget summit, which is planned as a physical event in autumn this year. But the dates and location are still to be confirmed, but we'd of course be very happy if many of you could join us there as well. And next, please. And that was it, I guess, right? Yes, last slide. So thank you again for joining us today. And I'm really looking forward to an inspiring session today. Over to you, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So now that you have a bit of a background of our project, I will also quickly say a few words about the training course. There will be a bit more information in the end, but in case some of you are not staying until the very, very end, we wanted to still include some things in here. So as you probably heard, we have kicked off this training course with the first Climate Budget Summit that was held in Malmo in October. It was a physical conference connected to the UBC Sustainable Cities Commission meeting. We also held a UBC Talks webinar that in a nutshell also provided similar information, but in a more compressed format for those who couldn't join in person the Malmo meeting. All of those materials are available. We will be sharing them again, and you can find the links in my presentation as well. So haven't missed much if this is your first interaction with our climate training course. We generally start on this very overview level. And as the course progresses, and this is just the second module, we hope that it will become more and more specific, leading to participants acquiring a little bit more specific knowledge and skills that could be applicable in your everyday work with either just starting climate budgeting or already progressing with it. We also have this general QR code that you can use to kind of register your interest in the course, but each module will have a separate registration link. Registration has to be done individually then for all of them. So this is just for us to see who is joining us and how to better manage and prepare for the upcoming modules. We hope that this course will provide the possibilities for peer exchange, support, and joint exercising, so that the training part of it actually has that practical meaning as well, and not only presenting and listening to a lot of theory and maybe sometimes practice as well, but we're also striving to provide you the possibilities to discuss with other practitioners from around Europe and maybe even globally. We also consider now, which is almost decided, so I'm presenting it as a done deal, the practical module on the CADS tool. So those of you who would like to see how it works, we will be discussing perhaps obtaining a simulation data for mythical Climaville city, where you can try uploading different information and see what kind of graphs and visualizations it can generate for the city decision-making processes and other important governance aspects. So this is something that we will be organizing slightly later. And at the end of the training course, like Donald mentioned, we will have Climate Budget Summit. We already speak of it that it will be in Brussels because that's the intention, to reach a Europe-wide audience with it and try to conclude the findings from the training course. As I mentioned earlier, results will be combined in training materials package, so it will be possible to review them later, but it's still not the same as actually participating live. So we do encourage you to take part as it goes. So today's module is about obtaining mandate and setting the cooperation, but the next two ones, which we're announcing already today, and we will have also the registration links available. The two next modules will be about creating the climate actions portfolio and supplying with the emissions data. So very technical work that many of us are already doing with different degrees of success. So this would be the module to share our experiences in that part of work. And then the subsequent one will be about the ways to analyze the benefits and how to move from the emissions data to the financial considerations, to the non-financial benefits sometimes, and to other aspects of the forecasting, including different scenarios. So these modules will take place respectively in 31st of March and 7th of May. Please note them, and also I think we should have in our chat now the registration links. So this is a very quick teaser. I'll speak of those upcoming modules a bit more at the end of today's course. But now I will give the floor to our first external speaker, Astrid from C40. As you probably all know, C40 is a global network of cities that are working with the climate issues. Many of them are the forerunners of the climate budgeting process. So we're really looking forward to hear from you, Astrid. You can share your screen now. I will stop mine and welcome.
Thank you so much. Here we go. Hope it looks fine. Yes. Perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Astrid Johanne Svensson. I work as a senior manager in the climate budgeting team in C40 Cities based in Oslo. So today I'm happy to share with you how C40 is working to support accelerated climate action implementation through climate budgeting in our nearly 100 cities. So as you may know, C40 is a network of mayors in nearly 100 world-leading cities collaborating to deliver on urgent climate action needed to confront the climate crisis. And C40 represents 920 million people and 23% of the world's economy. Now, I know that you have been introduced to C40's definition of climate budgeting in the previous module, and here you can see it on the screen. I just believe that it's important to stress that a climate budget mainstreams climate action into an existing governance system. So with the climate budget, we're not creating something new, but we are rather changing the way we work through an existing system. In other words, climate budgeting is a whole of government approach with shared responsibility. It's built on transparency, informed decision-making, and accountability in actions to implement and accelerate delivery on climate targets. Importantly, climate budgeting is an iterative and continuous process. It is not a one-off technical exercise. It's not a blanket commitment to increase spending on climate action, nor is it a deprioritization of other important needs within the city. The climate budgeting process is cyclical and collaborative. It integrates climate targets and considerations into the city's budget, policies, and decisions. And with that, city leadership can demonstrate ongoing commitment and engage all part of city government in climate action. So C40 has supported piloting climate budgeting in cities across the globe since 2021. And we have seen that it is a process that is adaptable to different governance systems and contexts. 13 diverse cities across 5 regions participated in the C40 climate budgeting pilot. We now have 11 in the program with the mission to facilitate knowledge sharing and provide guidance to cities to advance their climate budget. We have currently 5 C40 cities that have published climate budgets, and we have at least 10 more considered well in progress, both within and outside of the climate budgeting program. And the program has shown that climate budgeting is adaptable and scalable to any city context and lets cities set their own priorities. The cities in the climate budgeting program are spread across the global north and south, demonstrating the flexibility, variations, and different priorities possible within the framework. And we see that cities are moving at different paces, depending on their available resources, the political commitment, and the technical capacity. So it is important to customize climate budgeting to local priorities. And with that, I want to showcase some of the cities in the program that have taken on different approaches to climate budgeting. Let me first show a video from the city of Oslo, who celebrated their 10th anniversary of climate budgeting. And this video is fresh off the press. So hopefully we won't have any technical problems and you will hear.
Snart skal vi oppleve den begivenhet som danner selve det strålende klimaet på alt som heter vinterstorm. Oldemolrenner. Publikum er med å gi litt oppdrift i bakken. Det hører dere tydelig.
The people in Oslo have always been good at finding their way down fast. And now that we're working to bring the city's emissions down as well, all the way down to zero by 2030, we need more tools than just gravity. We need a climate budget. A climate budget is a governance tool. That means that the entire city of Oslo, a large and complex organization, works in a structured way to reach the city's climate targets. The very first climate budget was made in 2016. Its job was to set the framework for cutting the city's direct emissions. In other words, the greenhouse gases released within the city limits. So far, we've cut around 1/3 of the emissions that happen in Oslo by making it cheaper and easier to drive electric cars, vans, and trucks. By requiring only electric machinery on municipal construction sites, and by pushing for even more heavy vehicles to go electric, emissions will be reduced even further in the years ahead. At the same time, we figured out what it will take to get very close to our goal, which is cutting 95% of the emissions that happen here in Oslo. Since the first climate budget in 2016, we've expanded it to also include emissions from consumption. This means that we include not just the emissions within the city borders, but also the emissions we contribute to when we buy goods produced elsewhere in the world. That is why we, among other things, focus on renovating and reusing existing buildings in city projects, instead of tearing them down and building new ones. We've also discovered that Oslo isn't exactly the most energy efficient city in the world. So saving the energy that we already have has become a key part of the climate budget. Every year, Oslo now provides grants to housing cooperatives and businesses that take steps to use energy more wisely, and to those who produce their own energy. The climate budget doesn't just show how Oslo can cut emissions. It also shows how we can strengthen nature, so it can absorb, store, and withstand the impacts of climate change. That's why we make room for natural carbon storage on nature's own terms. For example, we work on sustainable logging practices, where only selected trees are harvested rather than clear-cutting entire areas. We also mix in more pine and deciduous trees, so that a healthy and diverse forest can continue to absorb and store carbon in the future. We're also seeing more frequent and more extreme rainfall events in Oslo. That is why the climate budget has also become a tool for making the city more resilient in a wetter and wilder climate. Oslo is reopening streams that were once put into pipes and restoring or protecting green areas that slow the flow of water through the city. If we manage to water safely and sensibly, there will be less pollution in the fjord and fewer flooded basements in our homes. Altogether, the climate budget helps Norway's capital reach the emission targets that we've set. We cut emissions and we prepare the city for the changes that the future holds. And maybe just as important, Oslo's climate budget leads the way and inspires other cities to create their own climate budgets and cut their own emissions. With this tool, a relatively small city from what once was the cold north can help drive major change across the world, for us and for those who come after.
There you go. So as you heard, Oslo was the pioneer in developing the climate budget when it was introduced, and they're now on their 10th iteration. And the city is focusing exactly on the iterative approach, where now it has all 5 city climate targets included in the climate budget. Both reducing direct emissions, reducing energy consumption, improving climate resilience, protecting and restoring forest and land, and reducing indirect emissions. Also, we have other program cities that have introduced climate budgeting and are now, London is now on their third climate budget. And they use the climate budget to deliver on London's net zero target to 2030. And the city is also applying a phased approach, expanding from government operation until ultimately including Scope 3 emissions. And the approach in London has helped to identify what further unfunded work is needed to meet the city's net zero targets. And importantly, it has established a pipeline of projects ready for when future funding streams or green finance becomes available. With Mumbai, they are using the climate budget to deliver climate targets for adaptation and mitigation. And they are focusing on internal engagement and training and strengthening cross-departmental collaboration to ensure climate responsive governance. And they are building a framework that highlights the climate and development benefits of actions, even when GHG savings or other quantitative impacts are difficult to measure. And what Mumbai is doing very interestingly is that each activity is assessed with context-specific data to capture environmental, social, economic, and gender-related benefits. And so these co-benefits are defined against the Sustainable Development Goals, showcasing outcomes beyond emissions reductions. And this approach has allowed Mumbai to communicate the multidimensional benefits of climate action, where quantitative impacts cannot be presented. With New York, their second climate budget supports the goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And they have focused on resiliency to heat and flooding in an equitable way, aligned with their environmental justice priorities. So New York is continuously improving their climate budget with updated analysis and that are aligned with budget and policy changes. New York has furthermore developed a very interesting resilience exposure inventory, which is a first of its kind analysis to understand the level of exposure each New York City neighborhood has to heat and flood risk. So as you now have heard with these examples from our cities, they have all approached the integration of climate budgeting in different ways and at different paces. And many are taking a phased approach to implementation. And this may be determined by the resources in the city, political priorities, direct powers in the budget, and considerations of system boundaries of the climate budget. So if a phased approach is used, it's important to be supported by a step-by-step plan, outlining where the city will begin and how the boundary and scope will gradually expand over time. Now over to what our cities are experiencing as impacts of climate budgeting, which are many, including breaking down departmental silos, fostering collaboration, accelerating climate action plan implementation, supporting external funding, and not least reducing emissions and increasing resilience. So climate budgeting takes the city from planning to action, providing this holistic approach across sectors. In fact, climate budgeting is considered so impactful in C40 that it's now part of our leadership standards, meaning that by 2030, all C40 cities, 100 of the world's leading cities that is, have to introduce climate budgeting. And C40 have many programs, networks, and strategies tailored to different regions to support the adaptation of climate budgeting across our regions. And we are also supporting this journey by providing clear guidance. We have developed the climate budgeting framework that provides principles and criteria to guide cities in developing, implementing, and adopting a credible and robust climate budgeting process. The framework sets expectations for the process and output and requirements for mainstreaming climate targets and considerations into the government's governance and budgeting systems. So we have also developed a step-by-step guide, which offers practical guidance to incorporate adaptation, mitigation, and equity consideration into climate budgeting. And with these tips and resources, a city is supported on its climate budgeting journey, and it's based on research, learnings, and experience from the cities that are participating in the C40 climate budgeting program. And in the step-by-step guide, cities can utilize the checklist to work towards and keep track of the needed actions in establishing climate budgeting. And again, important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So the guidance allows flexibility for different contexts and systems, and is meant to be a helping hand and not instructions. And we're also publishing versions now in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So what are our top tips to get started with climate budgeting? Well, with the Central Cities Authority support, hold on, I'm confusing my notes here. Here we go. A city needs to secure a strong political commitment and positioning climate budgeting as a key system to support the delivery of the city's climate action plan. So we know that the CFO plays a central role in leading the early process, and it needs a strong cross-capacity team with clear roles and responsibilities across departments. So the direct political mandate combined with the climate literate finance team enables access to key data and strong engagement across the administration. So it's vital to engage internal stakeholders early to ensure a common understanding of what climate budgeting is and what the city's climate budget will deliver across the city government. A combination of a top-down and bottom-up commitment is key for the continuation of the climate budgeting process to allow for improvement, to ensure the integration of the budget process and government system, and to ensure the technical components and institutional capacity to build the climate literacy and expertise, and to distribute the responsibilities across the administration. So climate budgeting is a process that involves all departments and all levels across the city administration. And we recommend that all teams across the city have responsibility for identifying, proposing, and implementing and reporting on concrete climate actions as part of the ordinary budget process. And again, each city is organized differently, but the step-by-step guide describes key roles and responsibilities of these functions. Independently of how your city is organized, there will be tips in the step-by-step guide to help set the foundation for climate budgeting. Finally, now I want to showcase the climate budgeting online courses that we have developed with our partner Apolitical. We have 2 courses, both for leaders and practitioner levels. They are based on the step-by-step guide and framework, and will equip public servants with the capacity to build reliable climate budgeting in accordance with the leadership standards in C40. And the courses are interactive and filled with city examples and case studies, and they're both theoretical and practical. So climate budgeting is something every city can implement, and we have learned a lot through this process in the program of climate budgeting in C40, and we have gathered all of our knowledge in several knowledge resources that are available on the C40 Knowledge Hub, including the step-by-step guide, the framework, handbook on GHG quantification, and we also have a newsletter to keep you updated on what is happening in the program. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Astrid. If there are any questions, maybe we can take 1 or 2. Otherwise, as you have seen in my slides in the beginning, you're always welcome to type the questions in the chat, and then the presenters can also see them and answer them afterwards. So thank you, Astrid. It's impressive. You have around 100 members, so all of them doing climate budgeting by 2030 is really exciting goal. Hopefully we can reconvene a bit later and share the experiences, what we managed to obtain until the end of the climate forecast and then afterwards as well. So good luck with that, and really, really nice to have you with us. We can then move on if there is no questions immediately to Astrid. And our next speakers would be my colleagues in the project from Hafen City University, Hamburg, and Uppsala University, Kim and Hannes, who've been working a lot with the evaluation of the piloting activities that we're doing in the project, and also working with some of the C40 cities, interviewing them in order to come up with a good, solid theoretical academic framework on what would be the best approaches to start climate budgeting. As we discussed previously in the course a lot about the benefits, definitions, different approaches, different potential arrangements that cities can do. Now we will talk a little bit more about the prerequisites and foundation and how to set up the cooperation in the local context. So Kim, I think you will be the first one. I welcome you to share the slides and begin your part. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I hope the slides are visible. Great. So as Olena introduced, I'm Kim Tatum. I work at Hafen City University, and I'll also be joined in the second half of the presentation by our colleague Hannes, who works at Uppsala University. And we have been following along this process within the project and also following the broader debates on climate budgeting. And we thought to bring some further detail into this discussion of implementation could be useful for cities who are interested in the process. And we approached this because this issue came up a lot with us in our project internal discussions and among our partner cities about what it actually means to begin a climate budgeting process. So we know these great examples, and thank you again, Astrid, for all of the wonderful details and this really interesting new video from Oslo. And we've also pored over all of the guidance documents from C40 cities, and we think these are really valuable. As we had discussions in our group, we had further detailed questions that still come up. What does it actually mean to get started? What is this formal mandate and adoption of the concept? What type of versions of implementation are there with different departments, different types of tools to support them, different products that are promoted or finally published by the climate budgeting process? So in order to get into some of these questions, we asked ourselves, what are the different situations that cities might find themselves in? And no city is exactly the same. And we noticed that there are some levels of differences that you might have at the starting point, whether it's support for climate mitigation itself in the city. So are the people and the local government really convinced by this? Does it vary from the different sectoral departments? Is it more considered a priority for another time or a side topic? Do you have an administrative readiness, like a culture of welcoming an innovative new governance tool like this? Or do people feel more overwhelmed already with other tasks that they have going on? Who can you really speak to about these things? Then there's the issue of the maturity of the climate action plan. Not every climate action plan has the same level of definition of measures, of responsibilities. And then there's the emissions calculation issue, which is also handled due to differences, of course, in national reporting standards and different local policies. It's handled in different ways. So different scopes might be covered by these calculations. You might have a carbon budget in place formally or not. There might be a standardized annual emissions accounting process or not. And a lot of these factors come into the way that you would approach the whole idea of beginning the climate budgeting process. So to sort of visualize this, we imagined the climate budget as a kind of mountain that you're trying to achieve these climate goals, trying to achieve the reduction maybe to climate neutrality by 2030 or 2050. And not everyone is starting out on the same side of this mountain. So some cities have a rather gentle slope. They have some mutual agreement among the actors locally that this is a good goal to have and we want to achieve our climate goals. There are some relationships or collaborations that can be demonstrated as sort of existing routes up the side of this mountain. And when everyone works together, it might be a first step to build the cable car to reach the top. So you know the top is where you want to go. You have agreement about how to get there. You can apply some resources to this issue and find the tool that gets you there. And we imagine the climate budget kind of like this cable car taking us up the side of this mountain. For others, the mountain might be a bit steeper from their side of the valley. Maybe there's a few more rocks in the way. Maybe there's not a clear path that someone has already taken. And when we imagine the situation, and we see this a lot in the different piloting contexts of our cities, we notice that there are some pioneers who start out, and maybe not everyone who is on the ground is convinced that they're going to reach their goal. But these pioneers work together and they can make some demonstrations along the way that really show what's possible. And climate budgeting can also be applied in this way. So we think that that is equally legitimate as a way to approach climate budgeting in a small sense than if you wait to build the entire cable car and ride up to the top of the mountain, right? So that's what we'll try to explain as sort of the basis in the rest of this presentation, Hannes and I, is that we see a sort of difference in approaches to climate budget, but we think both are perfectly legitimate in the local context. And one we call an informal approach, which is following the logic of climate budgeting. So we want to connect emissions considerations with the financial considerations, and we want to use that to support decision making. If we're following that logic, then that is a process of climate budgeting, even if there's not a formal mandate or a document that's produced at the end of that says this was our climate budget. And the climate budget instrument, which is this governance tool, and it's a formalized thing, and we have these great steps, which we'll also touch upon again, that describe how to follow this process. This implements the logic within the municipal budgeting process as this tool, and is really well described in the C40 documentation as well. So when we look at the steps in the C40 plans and guidelines for climate budgeting, we notice this step 0, set the mandate for climate budget, and it follows on from there. So we have quite a chronological process, and then this sort of cycle of implementing and extending, expanding every year. And it's quite clear where to start and where to go. And this is this formal approach. There might be different methods to reach these, step 1, step 2, step 3, and we'll provide some elaboration on what these are. But the process is quite clear in this formal approach. And in the informal approach, when this step 0 is already a barrier, that this formal mandate might not yet be possible to achieve. So how do you proceed with climate budgeting in this sense? And in this case, we'll further argue that it's a non-linear route. So these steps and different stages of the development of the climate budget process are still relevant. But in the informal interpretation, it's more about finding the right context. So maybe you jump into step 3 because this is the best place to begin inside your local context with the stakeholders that you have and the people who are willing to talk about this, the data that is available, and what's actually available to measure. And when you do this, you can focus on the alignment of this within the overall climate budgeting process. So thinking about how does the information work together with climate, with cost, and how can it be prepared in a way that's useful? And this is even sort of a preliminary, so maybe step -1 of first making these demonstrations, first having these dialogues, and then building on this whole process over time. So this is the overall framing of how we interpret this, and adding a little bit of context also for those who maybe are on the more difficult side of the mountain. And now Hannes will provide some further detail about different ways that these steps can be taken and interpreted.
Thank you, Kim. My name is Hannes Anogus. As you said, I'm from Uppsala University in Sweden, one of the partners of Climate-4-CAST. So I have a lot of content, and so maybe give me a warning if I'm about to go over time. But I can start saying, yeah, so there is a chronological step-by-step way of implementing climate budgeting, but as we heard, all cities are different, so are the approaches and strategies of climate budgeting, even within the formal strategy. So we noticed this within the project because all the Climate-4-CAST cities were working differently. But also, since not all of them have formally adopted a climate budget, we wanted to know more about some global front-runner cities and how they're approaching climate budgeting. So we conducted a small study interviewing 9 cities, including some of the cities you heard about, to better understand and describe different approaches and practical implementations of climate budgeting. So whether you choose a formal or an informal approach, the practice of climate budgeting can differ. And we try to identify in several dimensions in how this can differ, which I will present. So you can go to the next slide, please. So to quickly summarize what I'm going to talk about. So if you go for the informal way, if it's not possible to have the formal mandate of implementing a climate budgeting, you might seek a dialogue with some willing or positive actors and demonstrating the value of climate budgeting. So initially, this strategy does not attempt to alter the existing budgetary process. So, but if instead going the formal way, you would first setting a mandate and then determining the structure of the process, which I'm going to go into more in detail. And every year you prepare a climate budget, you review it, and then you improve the process. So there are many possible methods of conducting climate budgeting. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to talk about these dimensions we identified. You don't have to grasp all of it now. We will send you the slides afterwards, of course. But we identified this dimension within these 9 cities we talked to, and each dimension, you could say, represent a certain way that the climate budget approach can vary. And they can also be seen as questions you might ask yourself. Is our city doing climate budgeting this way or this way? So you will probably need to answer these questions if you will formally adopt a climate budget, but they are also good to know about, even if you're starting with informal strategy. So the first category of dimensions we call management conditions. So first, who will manage the climate budget process? Is it a new unit or an existing one? And it's important to note also if the unit is placed within the climate department or within some other responsibilities, for example, the financial department. And also the funding model. Will the general budget decisions be informed by the climate budget? Or will there be like a separate dedicated funding just for climate actions within the climate budget? And the remit of the climate budget instruments. Will the climate budget take into account only actions dedicated to mitigate emissions? Or will it also consider other types of measures or investments that could have an impact on emissions? Okay. So these are the variations of these dimensions expressed in those city cases. And I think, yeah, I will not go through the variations, all of them, but you can see that they can either be like a new organization unit, but it can also be a hybrid version, like a mix of, or a new version of an existing unit, for example. Yeah, but we can go to the next slide, please. So the next category of dimensions is preparation of the climate budget, which includes the climate actions it should contain. So then you need to ask, is this process, like putting together these actions and secure the funding, is that integrated into the financial budget process? Or is it a parallel process separate from it? And are climate measures developed within the process? For example, in a workshop format, or are they predefined first in a strategy document? And then, so even if they are developed within the process, they can also be derived from a climate action plan, for example. Or it can be derived from the city departments or from politicians, from different actors. Next, please. So we're still in the preparation phase. So are there formalized criteria for selecting or assessing measures, or is it a negotiation? That's also a dimension. And after this process, is there a list of climate action? There is a list of climate action, but sometimes not all of them goes into the final decision making. There can be a pre-selection, and that can be all based on financial costs or based on emission impact. That's what we noticed. And the content, so the content of the climate budget can, or what is proposed to the decision making, can be described quantitatively with like exactly the emission impact or an estimation of it, or with criteria more qualitatively. Next, please. So yeah, this is the way the dimensions can vary, and I will not have time to go through it, but it follows the same logic as in the previous slide. So then in the decision-making phase, we didn't study that. We didn't interview any politicians. But when a climate budget is proposed and forward to the municipal budget decision, this decision-making phase. And when it's handed over, it's not prescriptive. It's not rewriting or replacing the conventional financial budget, but it might have a varying level of advisory strength. Yeah, so that was our point. You can go to the next, please. So after the formal decision, when the climate budget is adopted by the politicians, you have a result in the form of a climate budget, so the paper product. And for all cities we interviewed, this included a status report of the track to reaching climate goals with emission forecast. But for many, it also included a list of funded measures and directives with the same prescriptiveness and strength, legal strength, as other budget measures. So they can be monitored and reported as normal funded measures and directives in a financial budget, or the monitoring of the climate budget or the follow-up of the climate budget can be on a more aggregated level, more general. Next, please. Yes. So this is what I've talked about. You can go to the next. So after we analyzed these dimensions, we suggested that based on the cases we studied, there could be the dimensions could be categorized in groups in three types of climate budget approaches. And so the first type, operationalizing, that type focus on a collaborative negotiation-based process, which operationalizing the climate action plan into concrete climate measures, which were listed as funded measures in the climate budget with monitoring requirements. And another type was it included a more detailed climate action plan with concrete actions. And the process was more about facilitating the prioritization of these actions within some determined funding frames. And the third type was target and assess, so where also measures or investments not dedicated directly to mitigate the emissions, so other types of investments and measures were also assessed. And this assessment, either quantitative or criteria-based, was guiding the final budget decision. But the result was more a status report and not a list of funded climate actions in a separate climate budget. Next, please. Okay, so a lot of content there, and we will have time for some questions later. But if you instead going for the informal strategy of climate budgeting, similar questions can be asked as in the formal approach, but these questions doesn't need to be decided on in the start. So concerning management conditions, you can start asking questions can be considered about how to involve or identifying a team of willing actors. Or should you then focus on expanding the dialogue to others or building a demonstrating case? And if you're doing that, are you starting with one important or easy climate measure or investment, or are you starting with the more general example? Next, please. So how many of the dimensions you should consider depends on the type of demonstrating case you're planning. Yeah, that it depends on the demonstrating case. So will the demonstration be limited to just a single investment measure or possibly a whole sector? And the dialogue should be based on an analysis of your local context and your governance structure. So some questions might be then, when and how are measures considered for funding developed in your city? Where in the financial budget process would there be an opening for climate information about measures? And how to determine which kinds of measures should be considered with both financial and climate perspectives? And what kind of climate information about measures is possible to provide reliably? What is helpful to decision makers? Next, please. So even without the production of a formal results document, the follow-up on the informal process is also important. So how the dialogue or the demonstration, how that resonated with the involved stakeholders, how further dialogues or demonstrations of the logic can build on this. Next, please. So as C40 already mentioned, and hope it's clear from this presentation as well, the process of climate budgeting is iterative and is always working to improve. And you're reviewing the progress and the results and have continuous discussions and planning for the next steps. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But we experienced that there are many methods to achieve climate budgets. Do you want to fill in with something, Kim, in the end here?
I would say from my side, thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you for listening. And this is an overview perspective, and you have the more hands-on experience. So it would be interesting to hear your perspectives in the breakout rooms.
Remaining time of today's meeting, we will devote to hearing from the cities about how they have handled the starting of the climate budgeting and their first cross-departmental cooperation steps and prioritization of those. Probably you heard more in your discussion rooms because that was partially the game of it, to hear bits and bobs from as much as possible, but also now we have a few designated speakers as well. So the first one, I will invite our partner from City of Riga, Inga, will be talking about their case of building understanding and capacity across the departments in the city. You can share your screen now, Inga, and go ahead.
So my name is Inga Belsham. I'm working at the Riga Municipal Agency, Riga Energy Agency. I'm an project expert, mainly on financial administrative issues, and also project manager for our Climate-4-CAST project. Let me first say a few words about our city. I'm sure most of you know Riga, but just to remind that it's a capital city of Latvia, with area of 304 square kilometers, which is very green area, located on the banks of the river Daugava and on the shores of the Baltic Sea, or Riga Gulf, to be more precise. And we have, unfortunately, a shrinking population of approximately 600,000, but which makes 1/3 of the whole country's population. And consequently, Riga is generating half of Latvia's GDP and exports. And our way to climate neutrality started way back with signing the Paris Climate Declaration and then renewed Covenant of Mayors. And then we also elaborated and adopted the Riga Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan 2030. Then we joined the EU mission of climate neutral and smart cities, elaborated the climate city contract, and last May received the EU mission label very proudly. And just a few words about the institution I'm representing here. So our agency is the municipal structure responsible for coordination, planning and monitoring of the energy efficiency, climate neutrality, and circular economy related actions in the city. So we work as a one-stop shop for residents regarding energy efficiency measures and assisting, informing, and so on. We also are responsible for implementation of the energy management system in municipality, and we also have circular economy action plan to be developed and adopted. And also we work a lot within international cooperation projects, and our Climate-4-CAST is one of them. And of course, across all our work, it's citizen engagement and awareness raising, and including awareness raising within the municipal employees and our colleagues, which is in a way topic for us today. So Riga has a very bold ambition to become one of the first climate neutral cities in the Baltic states, and to be among the 100 climate neutral cities in Europe. So it requires thoughtful climate action planning, and so starting with the city development program, where also there are many climate related aspects involved in our investment activities and policy activities. So I've mentioned already CCAP and Climate City contract. Currently, we are in the process of updating CCAP and also synchronizing it with the Climate City contract. And meanwhile, we start to integrate it also within the new city development program that has to come from the year 2028. So we have not formally introduced climate budgeting as such, but we have this informal approach, and we have many aspects of as we learned also at this training course, we have many climate budgeting aspects already now. So it is not yet a formal procedure, but one day we will go towards that. Our Climate City contract, it's both policy framework and as well as shared commitment to action. And we commit to reduce CO2 emissions by 53%. We are reducing by 80% compared to 1990. And we also strive to achieve climate neutrality in municipal infrastructure. Because the change must start with ourselves. So before we ask the residents and business communities to transform, we have to ensure that municipality ensures climate neutrality in its services, that we cut emissions and also prepare for all risks that the changing climate brings. But it's not only the story about reducing emission numbers for the sake of reducing emission numbers. So the more important is to have this common understanding and why the climate-related aspects are integral part of our daily work in whatever field or area we do work in municipality. So why climate neutrality is important for a municipality? So it's energy efficiency, so rational energy consumption, energy renovations. It's energy transition to resources that recover faster. So it's the energy security, as we do not have our own oil or natural gas deposits. It's economic growth, so less imported fossil fuels, less money transferred, more jobs created. It's a circular economy, efficient use of materials. It's reduction of air pollution. It's for health and everyday well-being of all of us. It's adaptation to climate change, greener city, less heat islands, less load on rainwater sewage systems, and so on, so on. So I will just quote one of my colleagues that has been very much involved in the work of the developing city climate contract. We want streets where traffic slows down and life speeds up, where cyclists and pedestrians reclaim space, and the city center becomes a place to live, not just pass through. So these are the things that every municipal employee can relate, and it's important that we manage to convey this message and help them understand that it's climate budgeting is nothing much extra. It's just how you restructure your work today. And I will also borrow a statement from our project colleagues from Aarhus at the last training session, when they said that we need transparency and equal access to knowledge, easy understanding and visualization of emissions, easy to understand purpose and benefits of the actions. And so I think that's the most important thing. And for that, training course like ours can be helpful, and as well as the CADS tool we are developing within our project, we believe will be also a good help for our future work. So how did we get there with the Climate City contract? So we tried to come together and talk, explain, learn, envision, project. By joint effort of building common vision, creating a consensus as much as it's possible, mobilizing joint actions, shaping the city development path, promoting a sense of ownership and commitment. And this, to my understanding, is the most important thing to start with. So there we started with assumptions for each of the sectors and scenario analysis, and of course the assessment of emission reduction. Then there were internal consultations about municipal departments and municipal service provider companies, identifying the municipal needs, potential measures, and as well as steps to reach the net zero. And there was a co-creation process addressing all these sectors of the Climate City contract, and with a series of sectoral co-creation sessions involving more than 130 stakeholders. So in discussions to come to conclusions and see to define and describe the measures. And then the climate goals, adopted pathways, and preferred policy scenarios were validated by stakeholders and policymakers. And the last step was the political validation, and the Climate City contract was signed by the political and administrative leaders of the Riga city. But as we heard in the presentations earlier today, and also to a large extent in our breakup discussions, so the most important is how to get municipal colleagues on board with that, and how to ensure that climate policies are taken horizontally across all sectors. So, and for that, just one small practical example, what can be done. As I mentioned, in Riga, we have energy management system of municipal buildings. So it is also installed in the schools under jurisdiction of the city's Department of Education. And but then there's the picture is an example of a monthly report that each school receives and has an obligation to display it in a visible location. But then there are some challenges regarding the ownership and daily management decisions. And mainly because the school directors are responsible for educational matters, not that much about the real estate management and how to ensure that this system works and how to ensure the effective daily energy saving decisions. And we have a solution to make use part of it and empower the eco friendly students in schools with knowledge and tools. So we, for the 2 years already, we organize Riga School Climate Days, which among other improve student knowledge and help to reduce energy consumption in municipality schools, because the students are asked to come up with different solutions to improve something in their schools. But among these aims, we also find that through the school children, the awareness can be created also in families and wider in the society wider. So, and this is the way in creating a change in habits. So we also have a service of energy detective that schools can apply and invite an energy detective, who guides the students through the process of their activities. And then at the end, just some remarks or conclusions. So things that we should keep in mind. That the municipal resources are limited and the capacity is limited, and we have to very often work under time pressure as well as under pressure from the society on reducing a number of public employees and municipal employees, but at the same time increasing the services we demand. So we have to cope with public perceptions and political agenda, as we also heard the example from Germany in a breakout group, for instance. And today's global reality is so changing, so fastly changing that we are not sure what the next day's decisions will bring sometimes. So, an arguments that the climate goals are too bold, too complex, too disruptive, also prevail in the society. And also, of course, there are very practical questions regarding the data availability, quality, and comparability. So these would be like the challenges we have to address. But then also we have to keep in mind that we have to allocate and allow time to learn, talk, and explain. This is a time-consuming process, and we have to allow it. We also have to seize benefits of international cooperation projects, because that is the way how municipal employees can get additional knowledge, and in a way it's a legitimate way of getting away from their daily routines and activities. And also we have to see climate neutrality not as a sacrifice, but as an opportunity. So that means cleaner and quieter streets, lower energy bills, efficient homes, and confidence in what we leave to our next generations. And so I will end again with a quote: "A better future is worth the effort it takes to build it." So thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Inga. I think it's very, very nice and inspiring example. We wish you the best of luck with institutionalizing your climate budgeting process, perhaps with the, the mission label comes first, and then the climate city contract, investment plans, and so on. Hopefully the proper climate budgeting will be the next one afterwards. So yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. We will move on to the next city. We have representative of City of Vienna, Philip. Welcome to join us. Thank you for agreeing to say a few words about your experiences about creating this cooperation structures or methods where you talk with your colleagues from different departments and how you handle the climate budgeting together. So give us your brief introduction, and we also have Hannes in here to moderate a little bit the discussion if needed, because Hannes had the pleasure to interview you for their a study made together with the Hafen City University. So we're all ears to hear from you more. Thank you.
Thanks for having me again. Good day to everyone. Unfortunately, I didn't bring a presentation with me, but the previous presentation reminded me also of bringing a quote with me, a quote apparently said by Vienna's former mayor, who said that the Vienna city administration, the staff, is the best of the world if they want to be. And I think that's precisely the point that we have been working on as a team the past 2 years when engaging with our colleagues. So what I'm going to talk about is how we try to build understanding and the capacity within the city administration, even though our climate budgeting borders encompass like all emissions, all production-based emissions within the city borders. So our measures also target emissions outside of the city administration. It's not just our own administrative emissions that we focus on. Maybe just a bit of a context using the terms that Hannes introduced to us in the morning. I would say Vienna follows a formalized climate budgeting approach, rather on a collaborative side. So we have different administrative groups within the city administration, each with their own executive city councillor. And as it's probably the same with you and your city administration, different departments need to work together to accomplish emission reductions. That is, on the one hand, when it comes to actually reducing the physical emissions, but even more so when it comes to the planning process and the legislative processes beforehand. And oftentimes these different responsible groups, units, are part of different administrative groups. And coming from having a climate background, I think, like, to me, it's quite clear and obvious that such challenges need to be tackled in a collaborative way. But unfortunately, like, big structures within our city administration are still like very much focused on their own business and are quite hesitant to engage with other units, especially when it comes to crossing administrative groups. So Inga, what you said about like allowing time and energy to learn, talk to each other and work on things together, that is certainly a very important point. We have tried to tackle this challenge by introducing so-called climate budgeting coordinators within each administrative group. So they have been nominated by their own politicians, by the executive city councillors. Their job is to be the intermediaries between us from a central climate coordination unit. Our job is to provide the overall framework and to connect these like top-down advice and processes and also the concrete climate goals with the single units responsible to implement parts of it. This is a group of, I would say, like maybe 10 people, a bit less even. It has been the focus of our attention the past months. We've provided them introductory knowledge to basic climate knowledge, but also moderation skills, how to introduce change management within the city administration and so on. So far, it's too early to say how to evaluate how successful that approach has been, but we've certainly managed to broaden the understanding of what kind of challenges we're actually facing. I think before that, the focus has rather been on, well, people expecting us as a central unit to tell them what to do. Now we've shifted the expectation to, okay, we need more understanding, more experiences, more collaboration to engage in the challenges. Vienna's climate budget started in 2020, so we are running for the 6th year now. Back then, it started as an initiative of the financial department, and it was more focused on reporting climate measures that take place, which also had a very big advantage, being so that it was developed in parallel to the financial planning cycle. So when at the end of the day you would have a climate measure on that climate budgeting list, you would know for sure that they would have the funding. The unit that implements the measure will have the funding. We've kept that, but throughout the last 2 to 3 years, we've been focusing more on the collaborative governance aspects of climate budgeting, as I described before, trying to get more people on board and to increase the effectiveness of our steering aspects. So we don't only want to produce a list at the end of the budgeting negotiations, but we want to have people develop their own agenda, which climate measures they should prioritize for a certain period, and then actually organize the financial budget for it. Also important, I think that's something that's different from city to city. Vienna's climate budget does not come with its own funding pot. So we as a central unit, we don't have a climate budget, so to say, but we try to assist units to evaluate measures, to develop measures, and to coordinate with each other. But at the end of the day, they need to use their own budget to implement the measures, which of course is a challenge in times of missing budgets. So from a more critical perspective, I think in the morning we heard, I think it was 4 top tips of C40's climate budgeting implementation. And I think critically saying in Vienna, one thing we lack is the effective collaboration with the financial department. So they have been supporting us in the way that they allowed us to implement the process, to stay very closely linked with the general budgetary process. But at the end of the day, it comes to units and their own budget to finance their measures. And that is a really big limiting factor that we as a climate unit cannot solve by our own, of course. Right, I'll have a quick look on my notes, but I think so far that's all I have, and I would stop here and invite Hannes to start the discussion. Looking forward to your perspectives.
Thank you, Philip. I saw in the chat actually that my colleague Martin had a question. Maybe we can start with that one. Do you want to say
motivational incentives for units to fund initiatives? Well, on the one hand, we from the collaborative perspective, we try to provide them material, argumentational assistance and tools to identify co-benefits, to identify actual financial benefits when implementing climate initiatives regarding energy efficiency, regarding decarbonization of heating systems, regarding thermal insulation. Oftentimes these projects actually pay us financially if you look at it in the midterm. And on the other hand, it's also a must do, I would say. Last year, Vienna introduced Austria's first climate law. It's a self-binding law, and that basically requires all units to collaborate when it comes to pursuing the climate targets, both mitigation-wise and adaptation-wise. So units are expected to collaborate, and once a year we sort of highlight this obligation by getting a green light and so to say a letter of support from the city government, asking them to confirm our priorities when it comes to climate mitigation. and to repeatedly invite the units of their own administrative group to join in and collaborate, participate in the process. Exactly, sticks and carrots.
Yeah, maybe if someone else has a question, you can write it in the chat. I can raise one clarification question maybe. So you have a collaborative process with workshops, like focusing on prioritizing, and you prioritize kind of the measures or actions originally comes from the city units, right? And kind of derived from the overall climate strategy or climate action plan, right? But then the climate agency's function is to kind of summarize what comes out of these workshops and bring it to the decision makers. Is that right?
You could say that. You could say it, except for the last bit of it. It is us as a central unit to bring it to the decision makers. We collect what units submit, and then we tie it up and bring it to the decision makers. Where do the measures or where do the ideas of the measures come from? I would say both top down from the climate action plan that we have, and that's also our priority to help units focus their motivation to actually address the prioritized areas of action that the climate action plan outlines. And also bottom up, because many units have their own climate relevant activities that they submit. And gradually we try to link these two sides together, to raise the share of bottom up measures that actually directly address the prioritized areas that we define in the climate action plan.
So you could say that there are many filters on the way from the climate action plan, then there are prioritization workshops, and then you bring that together to the decision makers, and in the end, the results you could say it's a third filter, because it's up to the politicians to adopt what's in there. It's not like mandatory in that sense.
Exactly. It always comes with the caveat of limited funding, of course, and limited financial planning. So the top down side of it, the prioritized areas from the climate action plan, these big measures, so to say, they have a long-term perspective of over several years, whereas the bottom up measures that the units actually calculate or plan on an annual basis. And the final results, I would say, are these measures, just a tiny subgroup of it that actually have survived the financial planning process and ended up with sufficient funding.
They calculate based on their budget frames or the financial cost, but do they also calculate usually on their responsibility for emission mitigation? Kind of, is that in any sense divided between the different departments, or do they relate to the overall climate goal more of? You see what I mean?
I see what you mean. I think it's hard to generalize. I think those units that are more specialized in climate-related activities certainly have a clearer picture of the overall challenges and what needs to be done and how the transformation needs to look like. Whereas other units that basically like check in twice a year and then submit the measures that they think that they are climate-related based on our guidance, they probably do what they do. They have their main tasks, and then identify certain climate-related measures part of their duties.
Thank you so much, Philip and Hannes. We are looking forward to reading the publication of the article, and then there will be this more information from Vienna's perspective as well. But yeah, please feel free to use the chat while we are moving to the next speaker, and it will be our project partners from Norderstedt. So welcome, Herbert, to also give a little bit of your perspective of how, in case of Norderstedt, you have started climate budgeting, which was necessary also for this project that we are implementing together. So please go ahead. I think you have about 10 minutes, and then we'll see how to catch up with the rest of the time.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Hello, everyone. I'll start to introduce Norderstedt a little bit. It's an additional point of view. Norderstedt is smaller than Vienna and Riga. Here live around about 85,000 inhabitants. It's located in Germany, very close to Hamburg, and we are part of one of the 6 cities, as Olena told, which are developing climate forecast. In the past, Norderstedt was known for ambitious climate protection work. Nowadays, it's not the same anymore because the political situation changed in the last around about 4 years. Nevertheless, we have the target to become climate neutral until the year 2040. But nowadays we are significantly below this target. And I'll give you some inside views on behalf of Toya Engel, who is the one who does the everyday work with climate forecast, but she's not able to take part in this meeting today. At first, to work with this tool, develop it, and we are starting to develop and implement a baseline for climate forecast combined with our climate protection target 2040 to become climate neutral. And we learned we have to divide it up at the one hand for the whole city and for the other hand for the city administration. The whole city is the largest share of greenhouse gases, and the city administration, on the other hand, is the most expensive part for our work because our buildings and so on are expensive. We have to pay it on our own, and the city, the people living in the city and the companies have to pay for the transformation. So it's a double point of view and point of interest. Our learning is during development in this baseline, what data is available, where can we found it, and how up to date is all the data. It's important for steering for this tool, and important for the question, how much time will it take in future to fresh up the baseline year by year. Afterwards, we implement first measures of different sectors in the climate forecast tool, just to see, does it work? Are there the needed data? Is there cooperation with colleagues in the city administration, which are in normal under heavy pressure with their own duties? How many time requires it to enter a new measure in this tool, and just to test all the functions of climate forecast? And based on that, we select different types of measures for the whole city as well as for city administration. Cheap ones and expensive ones, small and large reduction of greenhouse gases. Important is small savings or big savings by this measure, and at least measures being simply carried out, or is it very time consuming to enter them in the tool and develop it? So these are general ideas we have to prepare before we could start to work with the tool. And to select a strategic sector where we would like to start first is first a question: what is the most important sector for our own city? And it differs from city to city. For Norderstedt, using this example, it's stationary energy, which is the largest share, and the traffic sector, which has the least progress and has an increase in greenhouse gases since Corona period. On the other hand, the traffic sector is very difficult to measure because you have to find out what are the effects of a bundle of measures and mapped it in the system. So we decided for Norderstedt to start up with stationary energy and the housing sector. So it's the next question was, what is most important for the city administration itself, for me and my colleagues? It's a question of a big impact, a quick payback, easy to handle under the conditions of many duties we have to fulfill at the same time. We have to find cooperative colleagues, and we have to identify together with them if the tool could influence a decision of a particular importance. So to identify in this sector the right measure to start with, there was a consideration of different effects. It's a question of scale. How significant is the contribution to achieve the objective? A question of money, which is needed, as well as a question of the savings. Actually, we are in a situation where there's not enough money for the city administration. It's a period starting on the last year, and it's important for our decision. And further on, it's a question of influence on the implementation. Are third parties willing to implement this measure? And these third parties are colleagues in the city administration working in another department, and we have to find out what is in their interest. If we did all these preparations, we can discuss the advantages of using Climate-4-CAST with our involved colleagues. So it's a lot of preparation before the decision-making process. And we have to show them the return on time investment. Is using Climate-4-CAST better than other ways of an argumentation? And we have to convince people who will have additional work with the tool. And in this context, there's the next aspect, the application issues. For us, it's necessary to work together with Causal to get the information what we need for our own situation. For using the example of Norderstedt once more, it's for us important how we can show not only the expenditure of for a measure, the investment, for example, for installing LED lighting, and the operation costs, the costs for energy, for street lighting and maintenance, but also the period of amortization. So we have to argue, invest nowadays in measures which are which have a short period of amortization. So afterwards you have, or we have, the money again for the next measures. Then the next aspect we have to think about and work until now is to search for simplifications in using the tool. We have to ask ourselves how accurate information must be and at what time in the decision process we need which scale of accurateness. And then the following question is, where can we get reliable estimates? It's not possible in a very early step of the process to work out with the exact costs. We have to estimate that to make it possible to develop a process. For example, in the very beginning of the decision, should we refurbish a school building or the town hall? We have to get an idea how much will it cost, but it can't be the exact cost because it's in the very end of the process. And we have to decide much earlier. So we are looking for databases with building codes by typology, with size of building, cost of different insulation standards, old versus new operating costs, and so on. And that's not easy. We try to get in contact with other cities and use their experiences, and we try to search for open databases where we can get these informations. Until now, we didn't get it, but we still carry on with this efforts. And maybe it's a German specialty. There are considerations of the legal framework conditions. In our situation where the debts are too high, it could be the only possibility to change, to choose a measure which is more expensive, for example, to replace a whole street lamp than to change only the head to LED, because it's two types of budgetary rules. And only the first one, to change the whole street lamp, the expensive way, is possible to finance it by credit. And this is the only situation to handle it nowadays in this situation with our budget, without enough money for the more rational way, the cheaper way. So there are argumentations which are very crazy for us, but they are due to the legal framework. My conclusions. At first, for decides the strategic approach, we have to become familiar with the tool before starting working with it. In Norderstedt, we did it in the informal way, as Hannes told us before, because it's much easier to work together with the city administration as with the political parties. they are acting in the last years very contradictorily, and not only based on our logical structure, the logical structure of the tool Climate-4-CAST. So next step is to convince our colleagues of the advantages of using this tool. And to get this convincement, we have to ask them for their needs in their everyday work and develop a use case together with them, and not for them, but with them, and make them, by this, two willing partners for us. And we have to choose together with them a good application example. It must be easy enough for the start. It has to show the benefits for the decision-making process, and afterwards we have to convince the decision makers, political bodies, third parties, of the advantages regarding the tool as well as climate protection, and combining this environmental and financial benefits, taking into account the time remaining. That's in short our process and our ideas how to use Climate-4-CAST.
Thank you, Herbert. I think it's pretty unique perspective, because we were talking about formal versus informal, but in your case, there was a very specific need to start this process because of the project that you have joined. And that's yet another incentive just to not procrastinate and just do it by the book, establish the structure and start working, collecting the data and doing the evaluation. A very nice teaser into our next modules and getting to know the tool. And I will just talk a bit more about the training course remaining elements. So we have shared with you the registration links. We mentioned the practical hands-on training for the CADS tool. So this is what's coming, and also the second Climate Budget Summit. A bit more about the modules. So we make these two in parallel, even though they will be happening on different months and there will be break in between, but we see them as very much connected stages of the process, something that have been already mentioned by some speakers today, related to the emission inventory data collection and also related to the cost and financial aspects analysis. So these were the kind of subjects we would like to focus in the upcoming modules. You can see some of the descriptions in there. I won't mention them all, but you can read about them on our website. We will be shortly publishing draft agenda for the meetings, and also some of the potential keynote subjects that we would like to address in both of these modules. What is important that we try to build them in the similar way, that there will be a theory part, there will be practical examples from the cities, from inside our project, and hopefully from the outside as well. And there will be moderated discussions like today, hopefully longer, in order to allow people to discuss. What is a little bit open for us still is which ways of the interaction we should deploy, also maybe a little bit like outside the training course, depending on how much determination you have to learn more, to practice your acquired skills, and to do a bit of work outside of it. Or maybe many times was mentioned today how busy everyone is and how intense our work days are. Perhaps this is also not the best way to continue. So we would like to offer you some ways of this kind of exchange and peer support, how we can enhance these training modules in the future, especially the upcoming two ones for which we have sufficient time to prepare. So like we experienced today, the moderated discussions in breakout rooms usually go pretty well. We can attach them to the topics that are handled in the training course module, or have similar questions about cities' experiences and just divide participants more or less evenly so that everybody has a possibility to discuss. Probably we will need more breakout rooms as well, seeing how we had pretty good participation rate today. But we also consider a little bit more in-depth ways of exchange. And one of them could be, for example, peer matchmaking with other cities for a little bit more in-depth exchange. It could be done in the free form. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to one another outside the scheduled events and just ask more questions from the speakers, from the commenters, from those you got to know in the breakout rooms. But also there's a possibility to have it in a little bit more organized schedule fashion. So there's one possibility. We also consider maybe giving a small homework related tasks after each module, not after this one, but in the next two, when we come down to a little bit more concrete exercises that are possible to be done with the emission calculations and with the climate, like the financing part of it, cost benefit analysis and so on. Or even one can attempt to do a mini climate budget pilot exercise with choosing a particular climate action and then trying to do it from the beginning to the end. Especially maybe this could be an interesting way for cities that are somewhere in the middle of this process, that some of the initial prerequisites are met, but the next steps are a little bit unclear. So these are the methods we offer you to consider in integrating in the upcoming training course modules. And we thought that perhaps we can have a vote on this. So because our previous modules of the training course were done in the established different formats. This is the first like true hardcore training now. It's really, I think it was really informative for us how it could go, getting to know all the participants and seeing how the interaction flows. So we're really thankful for your participation and contributions. And yeah, you also are absolutely free to reach out to us as the organizers of the next ones with some suggestions, comments, and any kind of feedback that you might have for it. I think I will stop sharing my screen so that I can see the rest of the people and the results as well. Okay, so I think we can slowly finish. So the first two options so far are the most voted for. Indeed, discussions in the breakout rooms were good. We can do a little bit more effort with the matching cities. I did have a comment for Philip, but he left already, that we need to bring him together with Copenhagen, for whom the whole climate budgeting is being driven by the financial department, something that they struggle in Vienna. So perhaps that's already the first candidate for the matchmaking. But yeah, we will be in touch with you, and thank you once again. I think we will end with this and see you next time on 31st of March. Please register and continue training with us. Thank you so much.